All right, good morning. So the judge reminds me that I promised yesterday to share a little bit more on the spiritual side of what we've been learning the last couple of days. The judge called me the other day and reminded me that as we get through the very intricate details of how to perform the halachas and the details and the laws of how to perform these various mitzvahs, it's important to keep in mind the more spiritual component. So I promised that I would share some thoughts. So we discussed a couple of days ago, and it's been a discussion for a few days about this dispute regarding the broken matzah on Pesach, right? So we all know that we have three matzahs, and we break the middle one at the Seder, right? We also know, well, let's start from this way. We all know that on a regular Shabbos and Yom Tov, we're required to make the bracha of hamotzi, make the bracha over bread, while holding two loaves of bread, right? It's called lechem mishnah, right? Lechem means bread, mishnah means doubled bread. That's what we're supposed to do. And we hold two loaves of bread and we make the bracha hamotzi. Pesach is no different. We have to hold two loaves. On Passover, we don't have loaves. We have matzah loaves, but they're technically loaves of bread, just matzah bread. And we have to hold two loaves of bread, two whole matzahs, and make the blessing over it. Now, along with that, or addition to that, we have the instruction that the bread we eat on the Seder night be poor man's bread. Poor man's bread, we learned, means two things. Number one, it's made in haste, therefore it's flat. And number two, it should be broken. Okay, so we have on the one hand, every holiday, Pesach included, make your blessing over two loaves. On the other hand, on Pesach night, you have to make the blessing over a broken loaf. So how do you do two of those things simultaneously? Okay. So one opinion is that you indeed need to do these two things simultaneously. So you need to have two whole loaves as you make the bracha, plus a broken one. That's how we get to three. Two whole matzahs and one broken one. Right? And we were discussing yesterday, you have to hold all three of them when you make the bracha hamotzi, and you drop the lower one. We'll get back to that shortly. The other opinion, the opinion of Rambam, Maimonides, is that this instruction to have a broken matzah supersedes the instruction to have two whole loaves. And therefore, all you really need to have is two matzahs, one whole, one broken. Right? Follow that? Right? So you either have to do both injunctions. You have two whole matzahs, two whole loaves, and then plus the broken one, or the instruction to have a broken one supersedes the general instruction to have two whole loaves, and therefore all you need is 1.5 matzahs, really, or one whole one and one broken.
Soon we will have three of them. You increase, soon we have three of them to eat them.
This is the dispute we're discussing here. So just perhaps offering a spiritual insight to this dispute, just to what's the spiritual message that undergirds this halachic dispute. So what's the idea of the broken matzah, right? What's the idea of the broken matzah? The idea of the broken matzah, of course, is the acceptance of our imperfection as a prerequisite for freedom. Right? The Seder night is freedom, and the idea is that we're liberated from all these things that hold us back, right? And sometimes what holds us back is either our expectation of perfection or our assumption that we're perfect. And then we either plateau because we think we're perfect, or we give up because we're expecting imperfection. We're expecting perfection. And the broken matzah is there to remind us that, like the famous teaching or the famous line of the Kotzker Rebbe, the Rebbe of Kotsk. I'm sure the judge knows the line I'm about to share. The Rebbe of Kotsk, who lived in a little Polish town called Kotsk in the mid-1800s, famously said, "There's nothing more whole than a broken heart." It's one of the famous lines. Nothing more whole than a broken heart. Right? And there's the message of the broken matzah. And here comes a dispute. Should this feeling of broken matzah, this feeling of I don't have to be perfect and I'm not perfect, does that override my 2 whole matzahs, or is in addition to my 2 whole matzahs? And there's the dispute. So one way of thinking is, at this stage, we're accepting imperfection, then drop everything else. Once you accept that, then you can build. So forget your 2 whole matzah, your 2 whole loaves. Forget the sense of reassuredness and self-assuredness. Just put that aside. Now just accept that it's okay to be imperfect. And that's who we are, and we're imperfect. And then from there, we can build. Opinion A. And that opinion would say, you don't need to have the 2 whole loaves on the Seder night, because now the focus is on accepting that it's okay to be imperfect. When you get to the holiday next week, and it's not the Seder night anymore, now you'll hold 2 loaves. But for now, just focus wholly and completely on that. And the other opinion says, it's true maybe that you're imperfect, but who made you imperfect?
Yes, sir.
Who made the Yetzer Hara? Who made the Yetzer Hara?
Hashem did.
So who made my imperfection? Not me. I didn't make my imperfection. God made that imperfection. So my imperfection is perfectly perfect. So even as I have the broken matzah, I still have my 2 whole loaves. Maybe perhaps this is the spiritual underlining thinking behind these 2 different opinions as to how to perform the mitzvah of the broken matzah, either in addition, either to replace the whole loaves, as if to say, now just focus on accepting imperfection as is, and put aside your 2 whole loaves, put aside your self-assured version of yourself. Or the other way of saying it is, you're imperfect, it's true. And that itself can come along with your 2 whole loaves, because that's exactly how God made you. And even as you're holding your 2 whole matzahs, because you know who you are, there's still the acceptance that I'm imperfect, because that's just the way you made me. So perhaps these are the 2 different versions. So we know we all rule. We know that how we practice. We practice according to the second opinion, which is to have 2 whole matzahs plus the broken one. So then that would be our method of accepting our brokenness, not as a freestanding I am broken, but rather I'm broken because you made me this way. And therefore my 2 matzahs, my 2 whole loaves are present even as I carry my broken matzah. And that's how we rule in halacha. Okay, so there's, and thank you to the judge for inspiring that. And you have to remind me every now and again. We'll try to share some spiritual insight into the halacha, into our legal analysis.
Everybody who thinks they're perfect needs a psychiatrist.
Sorry?
Everybody who thinks they're perfect needs a psychiatrist.
See, that's the funny thing. Everybody who thinks they're perfect needs a psychiatrist, and everybody who thinks all they are is broken also needs a psychiatrist, right? So you got to have the whole matzahs and the broken matzah. You got to have both in there, right?
When we say that the broken matzah is meant for the bracha of the mitzvah of a matzah, and the 2 whole ones.
Bracha hamotzi. Yeah, so that's the halacha we're getting to right now. You're speaking in the spiritual sense and the halachic sense. Yes, that's where we're going right now. Yeah. So the halacha we were discussing yesterday is before we eat our matzah, we make 2 blessings, right? Blessing number 1 is thank you Hashem for bread, which that hamotzi lechem haaretz, which we recite anytime we eat bread. Tonight being matzah bread, but bread nonetheless. So we thank Hashem for bread. That's bracha number 1, hamotzi lechem haaretz. And then the second bracha is thank you Hashem for the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. So one is a blessing, what we call birchas hanehanin, blessing of enjoyment. If I'm enjoying something in this world, I thank Hashem for that enjoyment. And the second bracha is birchas mitzvahs, thanking Hashem for the mitzvah, which we do every time we do a mitzvah. Before we put on tefillin, when we have Shabbos, we make Kiddush, we're thanking Hashem for the mitzvah of Shabbos, and so on. So we also discussed, this is where we are now. And this is to what you were discussing.
Kind of simplified in my.
Yeah, this is where we're going, exactly. That's right.
Reason.
Oh, the halachic reason, yes, the halachic reason as to why they're separate, correct. That's right. So the halachic understanding as to why they're separate is, when you thank Hashem for bread, any bread, the optimal way to do it, actually, when you thank Hashem for any food, the optimal way to do it is on a whole food item. So if you're going to eat an apple, for example, make the bracha on the apple and then cut it. First thank Hashem for fruit and then cut. That way your blessing has been recited over a whole item. Same thing with a loaf of bread. You make the blessing over the bread and then cut it up. Okay? So you have to have the whole matzah, your whole bread, when you make the first bracha, hamotzi. So hamotzi, therefore, lands on, for lack of a better term, term. In Hebrew, you say chal. It means to like land on it. It resides upon. I don't know what would be the legal term for that. It's
It hits its mark, so to speak.
It's right.
yeah,
It's right. It's ready. Yeah.
yeah,
It's ready.
it's ripe on the whole matzah. Is that the way to say it?
Right.
It's ripe
Right.
on the whole matzah. Is that the way you say it?
In this context, yeah, I guess.
Right? It settles on. That's like the Hebrew terminology used. The hamotzi is settled on, or is recited over the whole matzah. As you make a bracha, you thank Hashem for food. You make it on a whole piece of food. It's the whole matzah.
You've embraced it with that.
Yeah.
You've embraced it with
Now
that.
the mitzvah of matzah, not the eating of matzah, but not the eating of bread, but the mitzvah to eat matzah tonight rests upon the broken matzah. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah to eat poor man's bread, which is a broken matzah. So when you make two brachas before you eat your matzah, the first bracha, thank you Hashem for bread, hamotzi, lands on the whole matzah, and the second bracha lands on the broken matzah. The second bracha, which is thank you Hashem for the mitzvah, lands on the broken matzah. And therefore we explained yesterday, at least this is the primary opinion, right? We have different opinions, but this is the primary opinion. Therefore we explained yesterday that the whole matzah is to be on top and the broken one under it, right? So that way you're going in order. Your matzahs are stacked in the order of the blessings you're saying, so they land on the matzahs in order, and therefore you would eat them in order, right? So the first bracha, hamotzi, lands on the first matzah, you're holding the whole one, and the second bracha, thank you Hashem for matzah, for the mitzvah of matzah, lands on the second matzah I'm holding, the broken matzah. Yeah. And we also explained yesterday that because there's a dispute as to which of the two is the primary matzah with which you fulfill your mitzvah of eating matzah, you should eat them both simultaneously. Right? We explained this yesterday. And because in order to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, one has to eat a minimal amount of an olive size, volume of an olive, a couple of ounces of matzah. It's volume, not measure. So, sorry? Not weight, correct, volume. Yeah, how you get to the size of the olive is, leave it for another time. You have to put an olive into water, displace it, see how much the volume is, and then you have to figure out how much volume matzah is without the airspace that's inside the little pockets of the. Leave it alone. Let's just say it's about a third of a matzah if you want to be super careful. Henceforth being referred to as the kazayit, the olive size. So in order to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah, you have to have an olive size. And because there's a dispute as to which matzah is the primary one with which you fulfill your mitzvah, the whole one, top one, or the second one, the broken one, therefore best to eat the kazayit, the olive size, from both, one from each. And to eat them simultaneously.
Is that because the bracha nanan doesn't have a requirement to eat a kazayit?
Oh, so the nanan is not, that's right. The bracha, thank you Hashem for bread, does not require kazayit, which means as far as that's concerned, nibble on the top one and eat the full kazayit of the second one, because that's your mitzvah of eating matzah. But because there is an opinion which says that the top one is the one you're supposed to use for your mitzvah of matzah, it's a minority opinion, but it's still opinion. Therefore, eat the whole kazayit from the top one and the whole kazayit from the bottom one. So you end up eating two olive size portions, one of the broken matzah and one of the whole matzah. So you make the bracha hamotzi on the whole matzah and the broken one, and then you make the bracha, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah, and then you would break off a kazayit, an olive size portion of both the broken matzah and the whole matzah. And you would eat them simultaneously, literally chew them simultaneously, put them into your mouth simultaneously. Otherwise, you may be skipping over the non-matzah mitzvah before you get to the actual matzah mitzvah, if you put one before the other, because there's a dispute as to which one it is.
So what happens
Hold
if
it.
you get a gift of matzah?
Yeah.
Like they bring to my office a gift of matzah,
Mhm.
and I bring it home, and the drive home was shaky.
Yeah.
And all the matzah's broke.
Yeah. Good question. We're going to get to that actually today, hopefully. Let's see how much time we have left. But at the end, as we'll see, what we're describing here is the best case scenario how to perform the mitzvah. But we're going to lower the bar soon and describe what the baseline performance of the mitzvah is. Here we're describing like the absolute ultimate. The guy has 3 perfect matzahs. He's got all the time in the world, and he's got all this figured out. So this is like the optimal version. But we're going to discuss soon what the base level is. And the base level is to eat at least one olive portion size of matzah. That's it.
What's the difference between better and not so good? You told me once that if I'm eating something, let's say I'm eating an apple,
Yeah.
right? And if I want to make the bracha, I could make it anytime while I'm eating the apple. But now you're saying that it's better to make it before the apple.
Oh, certainly.
So
Well, because there's better, and then there's the, second case scenario.
you get points. But
It's not a question of point. It's a question of it comes
you're
down to
still
this.
making the bracha. You've got the intent.
It comes down to this. Every mitzvah or every halachic requirement has its basic definition. You have to satisfy that basic definition if you want to perform the mitzvah. Okay. So in the case of eating an apple, the basic definition is don't enjoy anything in this world without thanking Hashem. That's the basic. In the case of eating matzah, the basic is eat an olive-sized portion of matzah. Right? But if that's the basic halachic requirement of these two respective obligations / mitzvahs. Right? But then you have, on top of your basic defined obligation, you have then other opinions that say, okay, it's really nice. Another opinion says, well, maybe you should do it that way. And then as you climb up and learn more of these things, you get a more perfected performance. Right? So in the case of the apple, you're making it at the beginning. Because again, the halachic requirement is don't eat anything before thanking Hashem. So you want to start at the beginning. And then if you want to really thank Hashem, you can hold the whole beautiful apple that he made, thank him for it. Right? Same thing with this mitzvah here. You're going to have the whole matzah. You're going to have the half matzah. That way you cover this issue of having a whole matzah when you make a motzi. Plus you cover that issue, that's poor man's bread. You're eating them together. Right? This is all optimal beyond the basic. Yeah.
And we also, we extend the halacha of having two matzahs on Yom Tov as we do on Shabbos, right? Carry over.
Correct. We're covering from Shabbos over to Yom Tov. Yeah. I think we once learned about that, right? Lacha Mishnah. You once discussed that at this table here, I think.
So there's always the best case scenario.
It's correct. There's always like the basic minimum, and then there's the basic case scenario, and then you have a spectrum in between.
And then there's all for everything.
Correct. And the more you learn, the more you find out how much more there is to learn. That's pretty much how it goes.
It's all good.
Sorry, yeah.
You get points for everything.
Right. Okay. So where are we? Right. So optimally, one should be eating, literally chewing on both of those matzahs together. And in theory, have all that 2 olive-sized portions of matzah in their mouth, 1 olive-sized portion from each of the matzahs, and then swallow them. Or one, swallow maybe in 2 points, in two swallows, is that a word? 2 gulps? But
2 swallows.
2 swallows, right? But you have all that in your mouth in there, which is a little bit of a feat to chew 2 all-sized portions, store it all in your mouth. It's not that easy. And that's what we're about to discuss now. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So we're holding halacha zayin, halacha number 7. So I'm going to read it in Hebrew and translate, but so you can follow along or just listen. If one is incapable of chewing up and crushing inside of his mouth 2 olive-sized portions of matzah at the same time, it's difficult. So if he can't do that, he should first eat an olive-sized portion of the hamoitzi matzah, the hainu shelashleima lefi svara shayna, which would be the top matzah, the whole matzah. That's your hamoitzi matzah. That's your matzah where you thank Hashem for eating bread, like you do at any time. Shehi ikar, this is the primary opinion, right? There's a minority which says it's the bottom one, but there's a primary opinion which says that the top matzah is the first bracha, right? We went through the order of the brachas. 2 brachas, thank you for food, thank you for mitzvah. Thank you for food, top matzah, whole one. So eat that one first if you can't eat both at once. Right? And only afterwards, then eat your olive-sized portion of the broken one, your matzah. In other words, eat in the same order as the blessings you recited. So the blessing you recited first is thank you Hashem for food, then eat the matzah, which is thank you for food, the top whole one. Optimally, you're eating both at once. You can't, top one first, which is your first bracha, and then second one, the broken matzah, which is your second bracha, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah. What are you about to ask about this?
No.
There's an issue here that you should be raising. What is it?
third one.
The third matzah is coming later there for the sandwich. Question is, what about the interruption?
Yeah,
If my bracha, thanking Hashem for the mitzvah, is the lower matzah, the half broken matzah, and then I'm just in olive size portion on the top matzah, which is thank you Hashem for food matzah, then I made an interruption between my blessing, thanking Hashem for the mitzvah, until I actually performed the mitzvah. That whole interruption of eating the top half.
necessarily because it's a doubt. There's still that doubt.
So number one, it's a doubt because there's a minority opinion. And moreover, he says, "Ein achilas hakazai shel hamoitzi. Chashiv hefsek b'di'evet." The eating of the olive-sized portion on the hamoitzi matzah, the thank you Hashem for food matzah, which is the top one, is not considered an interruption post factum, or in the not best case scenario, bein berachas achilas matzah, between my thank you Hashem for the mitzvah matzah, la'achilas kazayis prutza, to when I actually eat the olive-sized portion of the matzah mitzvah, which is the broken one. So the eating of the top one is not considered an interruption. Why? Given because the eating of the top matzah is required in order for me to get to my second matzah. Namely, it's in the fulfillment of my first bracha, thank you Hashem for food, which is also required for the broken matzahs. Let's explain. Whenever you make a blessing, right? As we said before, you're supposed to make the blessing without an interruption to the item that you're going to perform in connection with that blessing. So thank you Hashem for eating an apple, then eat the apple right away. Don't have a chat with someone else in between, right? You're not supposed to make an interruption, right? But at the same time, if what I'm doing between my bracha and my eating is required for my eating, that's not an interruption. So case in point, we said earlier, you're supposed to make a bracha on a whole apple, but then I'm going to cut it. Take some time. Is that cutting considered an interruption? No, I do it every Friday night. I hold 2 whole loaves, I cut the challah, dip it, and eat it. It could take 30, 40 seconds till I get there. But the entire time I was occupied with eating the bread. So therefore, from the moment I thanked Hashem for the bread till I ate it, I was only occupied with the eating of the bread. And that's not considered an interruption. Follow? Okay, so now let's imagine this. Sorry, you following?
Sorry. You're like a hypocrite.
That's okay. It's okay. So now let's think about this. The broken matzah, which is my second matzah, which is the matzah that's the primary one that I'm using to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah tonight. If I were to eat it alone, would I have to make a bracha, thank you Hashem for the eating of bread? Of course I would. And just like because it's bread. So I'm also making a mitzvah, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah, yes. But I have to make a bracha, thank you Hashem for the eating of bread, right? So that half matzah requires that first bracha too. It just so happens that it's best for that first bracha, thank you Hashem for bread, to eat on the full piece. So that my eating of the full piece is still part of the process of me getting to my other mitzvah.
So it's by extension, the broken piece is tied to the first bracha.
Exactly. It has to be tied to the first bracha. It just so happens that my first bracha requires the whole bread. And therefore my eating of the whole bread is like me cutting my slice of bread to get to my eating. So it's not an interruption because it's all part of the process of me getting to my actual eating. And therefore, even though best case, I make 0 interruption by eating both breads together, because I can't, by eating the first one, the whole one, is not an interruption until I get to my broken one, which is my mitzvah matzah, because it's required to get there. Okay, clear?
Half the size of each one.
That's a good question. Oh, say it again. You eat a half because I said each one twice?
Yeah.
I-
All the 2 kazai.
No, that would undermine what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because the mitzvah is only done if you eat a full kazayas.
Well, you're going to. You just eat.
But in the
You
meantime,
have to eat two.
you know what that would be akin to? That would be akin to I'm trying to think of an example how that would work. A mitzvah that required, that would be like taking a break in the middle of my mitzvah. In the middle of performing a mitzvah, I pause, do something else, and then come back to finishing it. Yeah, but in the middle, I was interrupting with another eating. Right? That's a good question. I have to think about that more. Is the
Yeah,
entire,
but my suggestion is.
no, I hear your suggestion. I had to think
do
about it.
Okay, simultaneously eat a half a desire to eat, and then do it again, repeat it.
Certainly in the basic level of the mitzvah, you would have fulfilled the obligation. You're asking why it's not the optimal version.
I guess so.
Like, why isn't this an optimal
This way
version?
it would.
It would mitigate the interruption issue
Yeah, exactly.
and allow you to chew less at a time, which is what you're trying to achieve, right?
Well, really.
Why isn't that better than
primarily
this?
it's a simultaneous one is
Right.
not-
So why isn't that better than this? Good question. I think about that more. Well, I'll tell you why. Tell you why. Because we're about to learn that as far as the basic level of halacha goes, all you need to eat is a kazayas of matzah. You have to eat an olive-sized portion of matzah. That's the most basic biblical obligation. It doesn't matter if it's broken, it doesn't matter if it's whole, it doesn't matter if you combine it from 6 different matzahs.
You would eat.
So if you ate 2/2 of a kazayit, if you ate 2/2 of an olive portion, one from one matzah, one from the other, the moment you finish swallowing that, you would have fulfilled your basic biblical mitzvah.
You don't have to
And
do
therefore, you will have
that.
ruined your optimal version of eating the whole kazayit from your broken matzah. See? Because, in other words, the same reason why you're trying to make it work is why it undermines it, right? Because you're trying to get to the optimal, but if halfway through your optimal, you fulfilled your basic obligation, your mitzvah is over, done.
Well, you did only half of each one. So you really
But on the basic biblical requirement, that
of eating matzah.
the basic mitzvah, eat matzah, the most basic biblical requirement is just to eat a full kazayit. And once you did that, it doesn't matter what matzah you combined, your mitzvah is done, it's over. So if your first swallow is a full olive-sized portion made up of 2 matzahs, at that moment, you fulfilled your biblical obligation. Anything you eat afterwards is not going to be part of your mitzvah anymore. And therefore, what you're trying to achieve,
Then that's good then.
no, because you want your obligation to be eaten from your broken matzah,
You did, you ate half.
not the whole. You didn't do the whole mitzvah from that broken matzah. The only way to do that is if you got both of them in your mouth all at once, or at 2 different times. In which case, the first was for hamotzi, the second was for the mitzvah. No, the truth is I'm wrong. Because if I'm right, then when you did his option here, which is to eat the full olive-sized portion from the first matzah, then that would have been your biblical obligation. The next one would be nothing anyway. So I'm wrong. Follow what I just said?
No.
I just propose a solution and undermine that solution. So I have to think about it more. I don't know. Good question. You follow my thought process? Okay, I'm basically asserting, or I was asserting, that the moment you eat a full olive-sized portion of matzah,
Yeah.
irrespective of where it came from, your biblical obligation is done.
So
Right.
the mitzvah portion hasn't been fulfilled.
Well, the mitzvah proportion will have been fulfilled, but you won't have gotten the optimum, which is to eat the olive-sized portion from your broken matzah, right? But
Not optimal, but
if that premise is correct, right, then the solution we proposed earlier, which is to eat a full olive-sized portion from the whole matzah in order for hamotzi, and then a full olive-sized portion for the second matzah in order for the mitzvah matzah, that too would undermine your obligation because you just ate an olive-sized portion from the top half.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
So if my logic follows, then, right? However, just to go back in my head, I'm just taking you through my thought process. On the other hand, it could be that when I eat a full olive-sized portion of the whole matzah for the sake of hamotzi, and then I eat another olive-sized portion from the broken matzah for the sake of the mitzvah, because the intention of the eating of the first matzah is solely for the thank you Hashem for bread and not for the mitzvah, it actually does not, it doesn't qualify as having performed the mitzvah. Because if I, let's say, for example, I listen to the Torah reading, and I have in mind that I'm not fulfilling my obligation now, I'm going to do it later. Then that thought actually stops me from my obligation for performance, and I'm required to listen to it again. So when I eat the first matzah, my intention was to eat the next one for a mitzvah, then this one by default is not for a mitzvah. Whereas if I did your solution, which is eat half,
Can't do that.
I can't do that because I am eating now part of my mitzvah matzah. And then I will have undermined what I'm trying to do, which is eat my full mitzvah from the second matzah from the broken one.
But is there instruction like this for this proposal to say have intent not to?
There's no instruction that's insisted. Well, actually, there is what we just read, which is eat the first half of the matzah for Hamotzi, eat the second matzah for the mitzvah, right? That's the instruction right there. That's the instruction. That's right. Correct. That's what he says. If you can't chew both at once, eat the first one for Hamotzi, the second one for matzah. And implicit is there is that I am withholding my fulfillment of obligation until I get to the second one. Whereas if you did what your solution was, I can't do that. That might be why he's not proposing that as an option, but it's a very good question. Okay, so tomorrow, God willing, we'll get to, so this is all the optimal version. Right, optimal version A is eat both all size portions at once. Optimal version, step down, tier below is eat the top matzah first for Hamotzi, second matzah for mitzvah. And tomorrow we'll get to the most basic halachic, which is just to eat a kazayas, an all size portion of whatever matzah is available. And that's what we'll get to, God willing, tomorrow and the days coming. Okay, have a wonderful day, everyone. So we got a little spirituality and a little halacha.
So appreciate it.